They were the different level servants summoned with the upgrade of the carnival maze. They calmly waited in front of Yinchai for their master's orders, but Yinchai's confused expression made Jinjenu suddenly realize something was terribly wrong. Even she, at a high level, couldn't do it on his behalf. This made Kim Jin-woo suddenly realize a fatal problem. If he didn't play this princess role well, would these Gerara people leave him or rebel and force him off the throne? Yinchai, who couldn't speak, was unable to give orders to the rabbit servants. There was no choice. He had to bite the bullet and pick up Yinchai, then sternly gave orders to the rabbit servants to draw a map of the surrounding area and build a storage room. Unexpectedly, the rabbits who had just looked serious all transformed into unruly rogue rabbits. What angered Jenny the most was the rabbits' contemptuous looks towards him, unable to do anything. He could only rage helplessly on the spot. At this time, Angela reminded him from the side why not use his noble authority to act as regent. Being a regent was a new term for Jinjenu, a novice. He looked at Angela with confusion, gesturing for him to continue. Actually, regency is a skill nobles use to control their subordinate knights. But this would basically mean depriving Yunch of control over the maze. Hearing this, he glanced at the dull and stagnant Yinchai beside him. It seemed there was no other choice. After pondering for a moment, he asked Yinchai if she agreed to him being regent of the carnival maze. Yinchai nodded in agreement without any hesitation. A girl who had been enslaved by ghosts since childhood unexpectedly became chosen by the underground maze to be its master. Hearing this, Domi told Kim Jinwoo not to worry. Even if a beast harmed the maze owner, it couldn't inherit the maze because only those chosen by the maze could become its owner. But due to her inability to speak, she couldn't control it. Jean Geniu had no choice but to use the regency skill to take over Yunchai's maze. With Yunchai's authorization, Jean Geniu immediately took over the carnival maze. The first thing he did was to settle personal scores, giving those rogue rabbits a good lesson. Taking advantage of this idle time, he began to study this maze. After becoming regent of Yunchai's maze, he discovered that his noble seal had been upgraded from low-level noble to lower-level lord. The benefits were an increase in the number of discriminating recruits and the authority to rule a maze as a regent king. Just as Jean Geniu was inwardly rejoicing about this, he inadvertently glimpsed Domi, pouring Domis into the altar as if they were free. Domi's mother really cared about her child's maze. Jean Geniu could only praise him for doing a good job, but then he thought, since he couldn't always be by Yunchai's side, why not upgrade this maze for her? This way, Yunchai's own abilities could be enhanced, giving her more means of self-protection. He called up the operation interface, consumed 25 gems to upgrade the carnival maze to level 3, and also used 200 gems to upgrade the Garo maze to level 6. Taking advantage of the maze upgrade interval, he no longer punished those children and arranged for them to build a storage room. It could be put into use immediately after the maze upgrade was successful. This time, the rabbits didn't dare to disobey his orders. Next, Jean Jinyu planned to summon some soldiers as the defensive force for the maze. However, when he called up the maze interface, he was stunned. Even at just level 2, the carnival maze could summon 4 types of troops. When the Garo maze was at level 2, it could only summon servants and guards, but soon he realized something was off. The military organization structure of this may seem a bit hard to describe. They were amusing clowns, cool jugglers, cheerful tricksters, and exciting minstrels. Are these troops? Can they fight enemies? They seem more like they're here for comedy. Come to think of it, clowns really are here for comedy. Just looking at the troop types and descriptions, this is simply a party atmosphere group. So no Gerara person would be stupid enough to overthrow the royal family that protects them. This way, Kim Jimu finally had a general understanding. He couldn't help but ask Domi beside him. Even the well-experienced Domi expressed that he had never seen this before. However, Domi's mother wouldn't say anything bad about her daughter's things. She could only deceive her boss, saying that each maze has its own unique skills or characteristics. Exclusive skill. Upon hearing this, Genius skeptically opened another window. Surprisingly, it was just as Domi said, there was indeed an exclusive skill called Festival Carnival. This skill would be activated after the maze troops defeated enough enemies. The skill could increase soldiers' speed and attack power by 20%, but at the cost of sacrificing 10% of their defense. At first glance, this skill seemed not bad, but in the end, it sacrificed half of the maze's defense. This was a bit intriguing. If it really came to such a life or death moment, activating such a skill would require real courage. In this light, for small-scale battles, it would be best to just activate the second-level effect of this skill. At that time, sacrificing only 10% defense could achieve a very good effect. If encountering large-scale battles or wars, higher-level effects could be activated as appropriate. After clarifying the use of this exclusive skill, he couldn't resist his curiosity and summoned one of each of the 4 troop types. As his words fell, 4 figures appeared before him in succession: a minstrel holding a lute, a juggler playing with grenades, a trickster wearing a mylar suit, and a clown holding a knife backhand. If judged by appearance alone, each looked quite impressive. He consumed another 3 ultimate gems to upgrade the maze. He himself also returned to the surface, coming to the profiteer's shop. However, none were suitable for fighting on the battlefield. If forming a suicide squad to infiltrate enemy lines, that might work. Just then, Jinjinyu made a new discovery on the control page. There was another maze-exclusive skill called Sweet Dreams, but this skill could only be used inside the maze or near the maze's teleportation gate. He immediately recalled the scene when they fell into the illusion in the maze. It must have been the effect of this skill. This skill should be very effective for guerrilla warfare against a small number of powerful enemies. But in large-scale wars, it would be useless because there wouldn't be enough maze energy to sustain this skill's consumption. At this point, Jinjinyu understood why this maze had been abandoned. It was truly difficult to master. Thinking of this, he suddenly became very curious about what effect Yinchai would have when activating the skill after inheriting the maze. So he pointed at the foolish yellow dragon, indicating Yinchai to cast Sweet Illusion on him. However, as the skill was activated, Yellow Dragon still seemed unaffected. Only through the system prompt did he learn that the energy was insufficient. To apply the skill to Yellow Dragon would consume 423 points of maze energy. Jinjinyu wasn't surprised at all. After all, this guy's strength ranked 3rd in the Garo maze, belonging to the 3-star hero category. With no choice, he had to coax and trick Yellow Dragon into releasing his abnormally high defense. Although the Spirit Law Dragon was foolish, he wasn't stupid. He immediately felt helpless. Since following this boss, if it weren't for his thick skin, he probably wouldn't have survived 3 seasons. Now being asked to unconditionally release his defense was simply bullying the dragon, not letting the dragon live. But under the pressure of his unscrupulous boss, he had to comply. Immediately, Yunchai cast a skill on him with lightning speed. She could only immediately follow Kim Jinwoo's steps to leave. Unexpectedly, after running for a while, his sister became more and more dissatisfied. He planned to sell the velvet gems in his hand. During this time, the profiteer tried to indirectly inquire about the origin of the gems, but was all brushed off by Kim Jinwoo's vague responses. Instantly, a beam of flashing matcha pink light enveloped him. Yellow Dragon suddenly felt the dragon race's bloodline awakening, his body filled with power. He declared he would rule everything in this world as a descendant of the dragon race. This guy's inner desire was truly exaggerated, showing no deep understanding of himself. Jinjinyu helplessly called over the minstrel to play a tune for him. As the strings vibrated, Yellow Dragon suddenly felt a heavy negative emotion enveloping his body, making it difficult to breathe and walk unsteadily. He felt like a failure abandoned by the entire underground world. Yellow Dragon's dramatic emotional changes made Jinjinyu realize that if used well, this maze might have a miraculous effect in war. He instructed Domi to tell Lisa to draw a map of the terrain around the carnival maze. The important thing was to hide the passages leading to the maze to avoid discovery by ghosts or humans. He planned to focus on upgrading this maze in the near future, because this would expand his range of war strategy deployment. 2 weeks later, the Garo may successfully reach level 6, and the carnival may also reach level 4. This expanded Jinju's territory considerably and also significantly increased his own strength. It was time to launch the campaign against the Undead Lord. He summoned Yusuf, planning to send him to deliver a declaration of war to the Undead Lord. However, Jinju's action made Yusuf think it was unnecessary. He suggested directly scouting the enemy's terrain and activity patterns. It would be better to launch a surprise ambush. Why declare war formally, giving him a week to prepare? "Aren't you worried he might find allies to fight us together?" he said, spitting on the ground disdainfully. But the profiteer didn't intend to give up because now the gems brought back by explorers from the underground maze were becoming fewer and fewer. So on his end, there was always a state of demand exceeding supply. This action angered Jinjinu, who instantly flashed in front of him and grabbed him. Unexpectedly, that spit turned into a small creature on the ground, gesticulating and clamoring to wage war against the Undead Lord. This immediately made the situation awkward. Jinjinu also realized it was a misunderstanding. He put Yusuf down and explained his reasoning. It was because he knew too little about the undead lord and the undead army, making it impossible to formulate a battle plan. So he wanted to use this method to make the enemy act, then respond accordingly and adapt to the situation. Just then Lisa ran into the hall, panting. It was rare to see Lisa in such a panic. Only the undead lord could make Lisa so flustered. He asked if the undead lord had already arrived. He was mentally prepared for this outcome. Unexpectedly, Lisa anxiously stated that the source wasn't the undead lord. It was a overlord from the 11th floor, the Iron Giant, Angela's previous master. The man, with his formidable strength, had become an overlord on the 9th underground level, but his rising power was quickly suppressed. Now he could no longer restrain himself and came knocking. Lisa, who had escaped death, immediately informed everyone about the Iron Giant's invasion. Hearing this news, Angela was shocked and exclaimed it was impossible, must be a mistake. Because when she left the 11th floor maze, it was still in turmoil. The Iron Giant wouldn't possibly leave his maze at this time, but Lisa's next words made her accept this reality. The profiteer said he would provide Kim Jin-woo with information about the underground maze for free, but he needed Kim to prioritize selling gems to him when obtained. Kim Jin-woo was indeed very interested in this proposal from the profiteer. Not long ago at the Jiro maze, the power difference was too great, leaving them completely defenseless. Fortunately, the enemy didn't deliver a fatal blow, and her escape was likely intentional. Moreover, accompanying the Iron Giant were the black market merchant and the auction host. From Lisa's description, Jin Genu deduced that these people's appearance was clearly aimed at his Garo maze. As for their purpose, it seemed they would only know after meeting, but they couldn't be careless and must be prepared. He immediately ordered the entire Garo maze to be on alert and ready for battle. Jin Genu's actions startled Angela. She approached nervously, urging Jin Genu to give up futile resistance because when facing the Iron Giant, even if the Undead Lord and the Flood Dragon King joined forces, they would still be defeated. While there's still time, flee quickly. Angela was clearly panicking. Seeing this, Jin Jinyu had to explain that his order to be on alert was just preparation for possible conflicts. Moreover, judging from the Iron Giant's attitude towards Lisa, he didn't seem to be coming to start a war. It was also a good opportunity to assess how strong he really was. Seeing Jin Genu's insistence, Angela could only sigh helplessly, but then she solemnly warned Jin Genu not to show any hostility towards the Iron Giant, no matter what happened. Jin Genu immediately noted this warning, but heaven knows what trouble Jin Genu might stir up later. Then the profiteer provided him with information. In the underground maze of Paiyu, there was a group of hell spiders. Rumors said they had velvet gems there. Several hours later, at the entrance of the Garo maze, Kunyan had completed the troop deployment as ordered. And Domi, following Jin Jinyu's instructions, had sent Yellow Dragon, Yusuf, Tia, and Yunchai to the carnival maze. This way, even if we're broke out in the Garo maze, it wouldn't affect them. Jin Jinyu then called up the system interface and closed the teleportation gates of both the boss and carnival mazes. Time was short, he could only do what he could for now. The rest was to wait quietly for the Iron Giant's arrival. Soon, a violent tremor shook the ground, causing everyone's hearts to race. Angela quickly knelt down. At this moment, the parasite also seemed to sense a deadly threat approaching, desperately urging Jin Genu to flee immediately. However, Jin Jinyu forcefully suppressed this anxious and restless agitation from the parasite using his energy. To survive, the parasite had to divert all its energy to strengthen his body to the limit. It also temporarily shut off Jin Jinyu's pain receptors. Of course, this invincible state consumed a lot of energy. Jin Jinyu silently endured the pressure brought by the extreme parasitic mode, his eyes calmly looking into the distance. He spoke, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Iron Giant, the respectable Count Tilly." As soon as he finished speaking, a huge figure appeared before everyone. While Jin Jenny was speaking these courteous words, his eyes were quietly observing this Iron Giant who exuded a terrifying aura. This guy was several times larger than an adult hell spider, almost as tall as the walls of the Garo maze, a truly intimidating sight. This transaction went smoothly. Jin Jenny still maintained his composure, not showing a hint of fear. Then he abruptly changed his tone, questioning Count Tilly about the purpose of his uninvited visit. However, in his heart, he was silently praying that Count Tilly wouldn't notice the troops deployed behind his city walls. Jinjen used neither humble nor overbearing and even somewhat arrogant words made Angela, who had been kneeling humbly from the beginning, tremble. She couldn't help but quietly remind him to be careful with his words. Unexpectedly, Jinjenu, without turning back, directly said loudly, "I said I wouldn't show hostility, but that doesn't mean I'll act like a coward who can be easily looked down upon." These words were not only a reply to Angela, but also meant for Count Talid to hear, based on Angela's previous description of the current situation on the 11th floor. He had vaguely guessed that Count Talai's purpose for this visit might be to recruit him and the forces under his control. Sure enough, after hearing his words, Count Talai removed the armor on his face, revealing a stern countenance. With a cold expression, he calmly raised his hand. The system immediately alerted that a high-level noble seal had been activated. Instantly, an overwhelming pressure erupted. This sudden pressure immediately forced all of Garo's subordinates to the ground. Jenny was also bearing immense pressure, feeling as if a 1,000-pound weight had been placed on his shoulders. If the parasitic mode hadn't strengthened his body in advance, he would have likely been forced to the ground as well. This also made him acutely aware of the gap between himself and Count Tilly. They were not on the same level at all, but he still defiantly raised his eyes, glaring at Count Tilly. Perhaps because the effect of this show of force had been achieved, or out of admiration for Jean Geniu, this pressure didn't last long before Count Tilly withdrew it. "You're not bad, at least better than those trash on the 10th floor." After saying this, he covered his face with his armor again. Unexpectedly, Jean Geniu seemed unimpressed and bluntly asked about the purpose of his visit, because Jean Geniu knew that the other party must have a purpose for this visit, not just to show off his power. Just as Kim Jin-woo was collecting the money and turning to leave, the profiteer blurted out from behind. Count Talai didn't immediately respond to Jean Genu's question. Instead, he first praised Angela for finding a good master. Then he arrogantly expressed his willingness to take Jean Geniu as a pawn at his disposal, offering to provide everything he needed to strengthen his power. Jean Geniu immediately refused. However, his refusal seemed to be within the Count's expectations. Or perhaps in his eyes, Jean Geniu was just a pawn that could be manipulated at will. Jean Geniu's attitude didn't matter at all, as if everything was under his control. He said he would invade and occupy the maze cellar in the near future, then turn to leave. In response, Jean Geniu also made a harsh statement, telling Count Talid to come anytime, vowing to repay today's humiliation next time they met. At this moment, an untimely voice sounded behind him. It was the black market merchant and the auction host, making Jean Jenny's heart sink. Could it be that the black market organization also had designs on the Garo maze? As if sensing Jean Jenny's current mood, the host didn't waste words and got straight to the point. The purpose of this visit was to discuss a big deal with him. Due to the importance of this transaction, the organization had specifically sent him to negotiate in person. Poor black market merchant, he was merely a guide for this meeting. Saying this, he tossed the small, thin merchant aside. Then he revealed news that shocked Jean Genu. "Young man, I know you have a family to support. That is, why didn't the Undead Lord appear immediately to stir up trouble after the Flood Dragon King's death?" According to their information, the Undead Lord had created a terrifyingly powerful Channy bird. Therefore, it temporarily needed considerable time for training and growth. Before the host could finish speaking, Jean Geniu already sensed trouble, because he remembered that after he killed the Flood Dragon King, the black market merchant immediately came to purchase the Flood Dragon King's corpse. And from the host's words, it wasn't hard to guess that the corpse must have been bought by the Undead Lord. The man who dominated a part of the underground world, ruling like a king, unexpectedly was informed that a terrifying force had been watching him for a long time and would soon launch a large-scale invasion. The reason was due to his own negligence, making Jean Genu deeply regretful. Now he could only be grateful that he had fed the Flood Dragon King's head to the parasite back then, otherwise the consequences would have been even more severe. But what he wanted to know now was the black market organization's attitude. They wouldn't have come for no reason just to share this information. He couldn't help but guess their purpose, wondering if they intended to blackmail or kick him while he's down. So suppressing his anger, he asked in a deep voice about the true purpose of the black market organization's visit. However, the shrewd host naturally guessed his thoughts at this moment. Hearing this, Kim Jin-woo immediately became furious. He turned around and forcefully punched the profiteer's large desk. The sound of shattering filled the air. He immediately stated that the black market organization would remain neutral throughout and comforted Jean Genuine, saying that accepting the Flood Dragon King's corpse was just a simple business transaction. What the black market organization wanted was also simple, just balanced for the sake of balance. Hearing this, Jean Genu was stunned with 1,000 curses running through his mind. These bandits secretly played both sides, stirring up trouble, yet shamelessly claimed to seek balance. Suddenly, his expression turned serious, and he sharply questioned the black market organization about how much information about the Garo maze they had leaked to the Undead Lord. He demanded they recount every detail of their transactions with the Undead Lord, otherwise he wouldn't fulfill his previous promises. Perhaps not expecting to be confronted so bluntly by Jean Genu, the host actually became embarrassed and started to fidget. He then tried to reassure Jean Genu, saying they only revealed a little information about the Garo maze's personnel scale, but for Jean Genu, they had disclosed all of the Undead Lord's trump cards. Using this to justify that their scales were tipped in Jean Genu's favor. Then, to ease the awkward atmosphere, he ordered the black merchant to write a 5,000-word apology letter upon returning. But Jean Genu wasn't so easily fooled. He pressed him to reveal more information about the Undead Lord. Time quickly passed another week. Everyone in the Garo maze was gathered in the council hall for the final pre-war briefing, excluding the basic defensive forces left to guard the maze. This time they organized and dispatched 600 Garo guards. 100 Garo archers, 80 Garo berserkers, 60 Garo priests, 50 Garo mages, 30 Garo scouts, 20 Garo shamans, and finally 100 Garo cavalry, a solid 1,000-strong army. The number was 3 times higher than what the black market organization had disclosed to the Undead Lord. Then, at Jean Genu's signal, Domi began to share the recently collected intelligence about the Undead Maze. A cold glint flashed in his eyes as he said ominously, "You dare to investigate my background." The parents of the babies were humans who once explored the underground maze. The undead race was created when the Undead Lord injected maze energy into soul-protected corpses. The Undead Lord had absolute control over them. These resurrected undead were divided into low-level, high-level, and chimerous. Low-level undead had no self-awareness and could only execute simple commands, but were vast in number. They formed the basic component of the undead army, serving as cannon fodder or meat shields in war. High-level undead, on the other hand, were resurrected from the corpses of powerful species in life, each possessing formidable strength. They were systematically scattered and mixed among the low-level undead troops, mainly responsible for breaking through defenses and precision strikes. Lastly, there was the chimera meticulously created by the Undead Lord using the Flood Dragon King's corpse. As for whether there were other chimeras, it was unknown at the moment. Additionally, all undead possessed immunity to psychological abnormalities, fatigue, and pain. So to effectively kill them, only attacking the brain and the head would work. Then Lisa summarized and reported the intelligence gathered in recent days. Information brought back by the giant horn rats revealed that a vast, undead army divided into 2 corps, one in front and one behind, was advancing towards the Garo maze. It seemed indeed, as the host had said, with a powerful Dragon King Chimera, the Undead Lord would surely lead the army to attack actively. That being the case, Jean Genu also decided not to fight a passive defensive battle like before. This time, he decided to take the initiative because he learned from the host that the information leaked to the Undead Lord by the Black Market Organization was from a week after the battle with the Flood Dragon King. They certainly didn't expect that in these 2 months, the Garo maze had undergone earth-shaking changes. But their children were raised by monsters, drinking monster milk to grow up. From the age of 3, these children were driven by monsters to dangerous places. By now, they had many troops and generals, so he planned to use the unequal information between the 2 sides to catch them off guard. Thus, he decided to divide the army into 3 routes for coordinated operations. He had already sent out the first corps led by Yusuf to directly engage the Dragon King Chimera. Hearing this, Angela was puzzled. Speaking of which, Yusuf had already left. So what was this fool sleeping with his eyes open next to him? Naturally, it was also Yusuf, just a clone left in the maze to be used as a communication device. All rock clones possessed collective intelligence and could transmit what they saw and heard to Yusuf in real time. If all goes well, Yusuf and the Dragon King Chimera will engage in battle 2 days later. At that time, Yusuf will set up an ambush according to plan to trap the Dragon King Chimera. Jean Genu will personally lead the second corps to ambush the Undead Lord's main force at an appropriate location. Meanwhile, Domi will lead the third corps directly to the Undead Lord's lair, waiting for an opportunity to steal his maze core. To ensure Domi's safety and the success of his mission, Jean Genu assigned the entire Gyro cavalry to Domi. He solemnly instructed him to be extremely careful and to retreat immediately to the second corps if encountering 2 or more chimeras. Because both the Undead Lord and the core of the Undead Maze were crucial devices for maintaining the Undead army, so taking out either one would have a decisive effect on this war. Of course, if the plan failed, everyone was not to engage in prolonged battle, but to immediately retreat to the Garo Maze. After Jin Jinyu finished explaining all strategic deployments and plans, he immediately issued the order for all personnel to head to the battlefield to Kunyan. Kunyan immediately accepted the order and left the council hall, giving a final pre-battle mobilization to all Garo warriors. At this moment, Jin Jinyu called out to Lisa. After all, she had prepared for a long time and spent a lot of money to get here for this shoot. She threw a tantrum and insisted on returning with a rich kid to film. They died, everyone thought they deserved to die. Now is your time for revenge. I hope you won't hesitate then. Otherwise, the one who cuts off his head will be me. After leaving this puzzling remark, Jin Jinyu left without looking back. Leaving Lisa with 1,000 thoughts she had endured for many years, just a one-day personally exact bloody revenge on the Undead Lord. To avenge her dead elven kin, 2 days later our first night Lord Yusuf was very confused and frightened. He was told he only needed to defeat a few insignificant corpses before retreating, but the ferocious-looking corpse before him seemed quite different from what was expected. Clearly, Jin Jinyu had set up his first night again, facing the large invading undead army. The black-hearted lord had only sent his first knight to face them alone. Now Yusuf was facing thousands of undead troops by himself. At the forefront was the undead lord's strongest force, the Dragon King Chimera. In such a predicament, Yusuf still maintained as awkward, yet polite expression. At the same time, he didn't forget to compliment that the Dragon King indeed looked better after the plastic surgery. Unexpectedly, his greeting was met with a thunderous palm strike from the Dragon King Chimera. Sensing danger, Yusuf hurriedly leaped to the side. Although his kneeling posture on the ground made him look somewhat disheveled, he had at least dodged this sudden attack. Little did he know, his figure had already reached the feet of the undead army. The next second, a sharp axe was already swinging towards his head. However, Yusuf's true form was a puddle that could ignore all physical attacks. Our Knight Yusuf glared fearlessly. Do you think you can stop Knight Yusuf's advance with his scrap metal? Before he could finish speaking, a dazzling red light flashed from the Dragon King Chimera's mouth. This terrified him, every cell in his body wanting to burst out. In an instant, a red beam shot towards him. The spot where Yusuf had just been was engulfed in a violent explosion. They've dug into hell, please save me, I beg you, save me. Kim Jinwoo suddenly woke up from the nightmare. It kicked up a cloud of dust, but Yusuf's figure was nowhere to be seen, just as the Dragon King Chimera was puzzled and approached to investigate. Yusuf's figure suddenly emerged from the dust. Aiming at the Dragon King Chimera's big head, he launched a fierce and powerful attack. The blow immediately knocked the Dragon King Chimera to the ground. It must be said, Yusuf's position as a lord was not without merit. Then Yusuf quickly took off the yellow pouch hanging on his chest. With a sly grin on his face, he said, "Did you really think the knight came alone? I've never been afraid of being outnumbered in a fight. Let me show you the rock clone army I've collected for decades." Looking closely, the pouch was filled with countless rock clones resembling Yusuf. At Yusuf's command, the rock clones swarmed out of the pouch, darkening the sky. These rock clones, with fierce expressions, lunged towards the undead army. They muttered about crushing the undead army completely. Like meteors, they crashed into the undead army's ranks, throwing them into chaos. True to the nature of the Gluttony clan, they were not picky eaters. They started chomping on the undead bones with their teeth, taking big bites. Meanwhile, the Dragon King Chimera seemed to realize the situation was out of control. Its head once again flashed with dazzling red light. In the next moment, several red beams shot out, exploding the rock clones in front of it. Yusuf wouldn't let it off easily. He rushed in and kicked out, interrupting its attack. On the other side, the second corps led by Jin Jinyu also received news that Yusuf had engaged the Dragon King Chimera. His face pale, clearly looking drained of blood and energy. This frightened Domi, who hurriedly came forward to inquire about the situation. Kim Jin-woo said it was just a nightmare about the past. This was completely unexpected for Jin Jinyu. He didn't think Yusuf's side would start fighting so quickly. In contrast, his large army had been riding for 2 days and still hadn't caught up with the undead lord's main force. Now that Yusuf's side had engaged, the situation on his end became very urgent. He had to quickly find and intercept the undead lord's main force. Otherwise, not only would Yusuf be in danger, but his entire plan would be disrupted, putting them in a passive position. But now he faced another difficulty. After these 2 days of marching, his troops were exhausted. If they engaged in battle immediately, they wouldn't be able to fight at full strength. At this point, Angela suggested letting the army rest in place, while the main commanders continued tracking the undead main force lightly equipped. If they found the undead army, they could open a portal to transport the main force. However, Jin Jinyu quickly rejected this proposal, because once opened, the portal must remain open for 24 hours before it can be closed. Moreover, opening it near the battlefield would give the enemy a chance to directly attack their base. The risk was too high, one wrong move could be disastrous. Hearing this, Angela could only give up the idea. Then Jin Jinyu asked Yusuf if he was confident in defeating the Dragon King Chimera. Yusuf wasn't very confident about this. According to the Gluttony clan's combat habits, they usually fight and eat simultaneously to sustain themselves in battle. However, these bear skeletons had little nutritional value. Consuming them provided minimal replenishment for the rock clones. In fact, he had always been wary of letting others know about his past, so he was reluctant to say much. Unexpectedly, as he looked up, his eyes met with those of the cute pets, the hint of stupidity revealed in their clear eyes. Moreover, the Dragon King Chimera's body was that of the Flood Dragon King, possessing the dragon race's nearly abnormal defensive scales. To defeat, it would probably take a long time of gradual wearing down. Given this, they could only hope that Yusuf could hold off the Dragon King Chimera as long as possible while waiting for Jin Jinyu's reinforcements. This was what Yusuf's clone conveyed to Jin Jinyu. The third corps led by Domi would reach the undead maze in about 2 hours. This news frustrated Jin Jinyu again. Things were progressing too quickly. He had thought the Garo cavalry riding the clumsy flood dragons would move slowly, but their speed was unexpectedly fast. This gave Jin Jinyu, executing a 3-pronged battle for the first time, a headache. It was truly a case of one move affecting the whole situation. Jin Jinyu couldn't help but review the entire battle plan in his mind again. Just then Lisa, who had been sent to scout ahead, reported that in a nearby valley, she had discovered the main force of the undead army and confirmed that the undead lord was among them. It seemed that a major battle today was inevitable. Of course, with time pressing, he had no luxury for further contemplation. He immediately ordered the entire army to rush to the predetermined ambush position and secure advantageous terrain. They must secure victory before Domi launches an attack on the undead maze. Otherwise, when the undead lord realizes his lair is under attack, he will surely make a desperate move and forcibly open a portal to return and defend the undead maze. At that time, the third corps, led by Domi, will be caught in a dilemma. Therefore, Jin Jinyu decided to end this war quickly. He then called out to Lisa, "I originally wanted you to personally deal with the undead lord. But considering the current urgent situation, I'll handle it myself." Soon, as a low, prolonged attack horn sounded, Lisa immediately ordered the archers to launch the first wave of indiscriminate volley fire. In an instant, hundreds of heavy arrows were fired towards the undead army to break their formation. The next second, the undead army's line was instantly shattered. However, the undead army quickly launched a frenzied counterattack, but they were all repelled by the Macedonian phalanx deployed by the Garo army. Made Kim Jinwoo feel particularly at ease. He couldn't help but scratch his head and smile. His mood also became less tense and relaxed. Seeing this, Jin Jinyu immediately signaled the guards. They repelled the undead soldiers at the rear. Then, from the gaps in the phalanx, Garo berserkers rushed out to slaughter the undead soldiers at the front. They quickly retreated back into the phalanx, allowing the Garo guards to continue advancing. Like an impenetrable iron wall, they moved towards the center of the undead army. The undead soldiers left outside had no way to break through. After a series of maneuvers, they were now very close to the undead lord's throne. At this moment, Jin Jinnyu's command horns sounded again. Lisa immediately ordered the archers to switch to swordsmen carrying smoke bombs. At her command, dozens of swordsmen immediately leapt into the air. In the blink of an eye, they accurately landed in the undead camp, creating a direct path to the undead lord's throne. The exploding smoke bombs also took effect simultaneously. They blocked the undead warrior's vision. This sudden change made the undead lord uneasy, just as he was about to cast a spell in response. Jin Jinnyu's figure flashed behind him, drawing his long sword. His eyes revealed a cold and bloodthirsty killing intent. Although you're part of the deal, it doesn't matter whether you're dead or alive. With that, he leapt up and swung his sword at the startled undead lord. Before the undead lord could react, he was already cut in half, facing the tide-like undead army. The man showed no panic, taking advantage of the smoke bomb cover. He then ordered Domi to strengthen the security around the maze. If any hell spiders were discovered, it must be reported immediately. He single-handedly fought his way to the undead lord's throne. Without hesitation, he channeled all his energy, drew his sword, and leapt up. In the undead lord's shocked gaze, he struck with one slash, killing him. However, all this seemed too smooth and simple, yet it subtly revealed an inexplicable strangeness. This immediately made Jingenyu feel uneasy. As he pondered, a group of undead had already rushed towards him. He dodged their attacks with a flash. This move suddenly enlightened him. He was certain that he had fallen for the undead lord's trap because the undead lord had absolute control over the undead race. If he were killed, the undead would revert to mindless corpses, not launching targeted attacks like they were now. Although he understood this point, he still felt that things were far from simple. Suddenly, he noticed a hoarse, obscure voice coming from the undead soldiers. Looking towards the source, it was an ordinary undead soldier mixed in with the undead army. But behind him floated the soul ring, symbolizing the undead lord. Noticing Jingenyu's gaze, the undead lord no longer disguised himself. He pushed aside the undead soldiers in front of him and came out while uttering mocking words. Jingenyu, adhering to his principle of action over words, swung his sword again. The next second, the undead lord spoke, Lord of Garo. I'm not the type to resort to violence immediately, but I will make you experience the fear of being dominated by despair. Faced with the undead lord's strange tactics, although Jingenyu is shocked, he didn't lose his composure. At this time, Domi reminded him that the maze had successfully upgraded to level 3. Hearing this, Kim Jinwoo immediately became interested. He's secretly communicated with Angela to inquire about the situation, as the vampire clan was also familiar with undead techniques. As he had guessed, Angela had sensed something was amiss since before the war began. She sensed a subtle energy permeating the entire undead army. However, this obscure energy fluctuation didn't make Angela feel threatened. That's why she didn't inform Jingenyu. Only after seeing the undead lord die and resurrect did she realize. It turned out that energy was the life force emitted by the undead army. But strangely, this life force seemed to belong to a single person emitting the same life energy fluctuations. Simply put, this madman, the undead lord, had torn his soul into pieces and implanted them into all the undead on the battlefield. So as long as one undead remained alive, the undead lord could resurrect through it. Such an unbelievable skill gave Jingenyu a headache, because his inability to eliminate the undead lord quickly would make Domi and user situation increasingly dangerous. But in the current situation, it seemed impossible to defeat the undead lord in a short time. Now, they could only change their strategy and try to hold him off as long as possible. On the other hand, the undead lord was still toying with Jingenyu with amusement, casually performing ghost possession among the undead army. Jingenyu cooperated by killing the possessed undead one by one. Meanwhile, he secretly ordered Angela to join the battle. In an instant, Angela's figure turned into a blood mist, emerging from his shadow. At this moment, Angela, hovering in midair, found herself in a dilemma. These undead were mostly bare-boned skeletons. He opened the control interface and found that 6 more Gerrera workers have been summoned. At the same time, the maze's core hub had been unlocked. There was too little blood to utilize for vampire skills. Fortunately, the combat power of low-level undead was extremely low, making them easy to deal with. Meanwhile, Angela's appearance was a signal for Lisa. She immediately turned and ordered the mage corps to cooperate with Angela and launch an attack simultaneously. The next moment, several huge ice sculptures rose from the ground amidst the undead army. In the blink of an eye, they merged into a terrifying ice serpent dozens of meters long, rampaging through the undead army. Jingenyu glanced coldly at the battlefield where the undead were being slaughtered. He turned and said solemnly, "In less than an hour, your undead army will be reduced to piles of bones. Let's see how you'll hide then." Unexpectedly, the undead lord was unfazed by Jingenyu's threat. He continued to emit his hoarse, unpleasant laughter. "If you also believe, as others do, that I rely mainly on low-level undead, then that's too laughable." As he spoke, the soul ring behind the undead lord suddenly flashed brightly. Then a massive beast roared, emerging from underground on the other side. The third corps, led by Domi, had reached their designated position. According to the markers left by Lisa during reconnaissance, the undead maze should be not far ahead, but the Horn Mouse guide sensed something unusual. Because he had previously accompanied Lisa deep into enemy territory to scout the location of the undead maze, and had drawn a route map. He clearly remembered that from this mark point, they could see the undead maze in the distance, full of tombstones and bones. Even on the map they had drawn, it indicated that the undead maze should be there. But now there was nothing in sight. At this point, Domi suggested they go investigate, but Canyon was worried. It might be a trap set by the undead lord. The moment he clicked on it, a huge iron lump fell from the sky, landing in front of everyone. As they were at a loss, Domi thought of another possibility, that the undead lord had already been killed by Jean Geniu, causing this. This idea greatly appealed to Cunion, a devoted fan, and he immediately dismissed the possibility of a trap. He ordered the Garo cavalry to move out in full force. Although this action was somewhat self-comforting, in their current situation they couldn't do nothing. Soon, Domian and his group arrived at the original site of the undead maze, but it was still empty as before. Moreover, they didn't detect any magic-blocking fluctuations in the vicinity. But the Hornmouse guide still firmly believed that the undead maze had once stood here, because here he discovered a bottomless tunnel. As a tunneling expert, the Hornmouse inspected the site and found that the tunnel had appeared recently. But what puzzled him was that such a large tunnel didn't seem to be man-made. Domi seemed to catch the oddity in his words. Are you suggesting that the undead maze was taken away by siege ants? The Horned Mouse nodded silently, although he didn't believe such a situation could occur either, as the guest was too outrageous. Even Domi, who controlled the Garo maze, thought it impossible. How many siege ants would it take to drag away a maze? Meanwhile, the giant beast summoned by the undead lord from underground was several times larger than the Flood Dragon King, with a terrifying body covered in hard scales, exuding an incredibly fierce aura. It was a terrifying sight. Its appearance caused casualties among the Garo troops. What annoyed Jean Genu more was that the fallen Garo guards were transforming into undead warriors. He had to take immediate action to stop this siege beast. He immediately ordered Angela to harass the giant beast from the air to draw its attention. However, this time, Angela disobeyed the order and flew directly to Jean Genu's side. Master, this creature is not a siege beast. If I'm not mistaken, it might be the undead maze itself. But this clumsy appearance didn't look particularly impressive. This made Domi notice Kim Jinwoo's unusual reaction. She immediately began to explain about the maze core. Hearing this, Jean Jinwoo was instantly terrified, his heart skipping a beat. Looking at the giant beast again, he saw that under the massive cross on its back, there was indeed a structure. Moreover, the glowing object the beast was protecting in front of its chest was none other than a maze core emitting an eerie light. No one could have imagined that this legendary undead maze was actually a beast. Under the massive cross on the back of this giant beast before them, there was indeed a structure, and the glowing object that held in front was the core that maintained and controlled this undead maze. Meanwhile, as if to confirm Angela's guess, countless undead warriors emerged from the gaps in the beast's bones and joined the battlefield. Judging from the aura emanating from these undeads, they were all high-level undead. Seeing this, Jean Genuine knew things were not good. From the attack route of the maze beast and the newly joined high-level undead, he could deduce that the right flank of the Garo army would certainly fall in a short time. Zhang Jai made a decision in his heart. Although he was extremely reluctant to involve Yunxi in the war, the current situation was critical, and due to fighting on 3 fronts, there was truly no one else available. With a wave of his hand, a bolt of lightning shot into the sky, immediately understood by Lisa, who was standing at a high point. She turned and gave Yinch the order to reinforce the right flank of the army. A confused Yinchai nodded blankly. The next moment, Jean Genu glimpsed a group of crimson figures swooping down from the mountain. It was Yinchai leading the soldiers of the carnival maze, charging into the right flank. This somewhat stabilized his heart. She even mocked Kim Jinwoo, calling him a coward. But before Kim Jinwoo could persuade her, several gunshots and monster roars from afar answered him. If the core was destroyed, all functions of the Garara maze would lose control. Of course, if it remained intact, even if the Garara maze was razed to the ground in battle, everything could be restored with its presence. At this moment, Angela's puzzled voice sounded from beside him. Master, logically speaking, such bizarre tactics like the undead lord's ability to change bodies at will couldn't have remained unknown for so many years, so it's likely not his own innate skill but an ability granted by the undead maze. Her doubt caught Jean Genu's attention. After all, Angela was a native of the Brothers' world. Moreover, their vampire race had always been for the Brothers' hidden lord. Her knowledge was naturally much more extensive than his, a late-coming maze lord. If Angela's deduction was correct, it would explain why the undead lord went to such lengths to bring the maze beast to the battlefield. This discovery gave Jean Genu, who had been in a loss, a glimmer of hope. Because as a maze lord, he knew that any skill specific to a maze would definitely have some limitations. These limitations would be the key to whether he could win this war. But the current situation was urgent, leaving no time for them to slowly investigate the specific limitations. So it was time for Jin Jinyu's specialty. He calmly crouched down, and in the next second he exerted force and leapt up from the ground, heading straight for the maze core on the beast's chest. But his intentions seemed to be seen through by the beast, which suddenly swung its claw at him. With his attack blocked, Jinjenyu could only flip and land on its hand. He then used it as a springboard to leap again, while also dealing with the undead bats that had appeared. Suddenly, a pop-up caught Kim Jinwoo's attention. It showed that due to the core's activation, distant beasts and monsters had sensed the maze's existence. Unexpectedly, an alarm followed warning that a team of 20 horned rats was rushing towards the maze, estimated to arrive in 59 minutes. In a blink, he landed in front of the maze core. Just as he thought the core was within his grasp, a fierce sound of something scraping against the ground rose up. With a superior combat instincts, the cat's spirit leapt to the side, barely avoiding the sneak attack, but he was not one to let grudges go. He immediately took advantage of his opponent's midair position and swung his blade at their back. Unexpectedly, the opponent's back seemed to have eyes, blocking the attack without even turning around. This extraordinary skill startled Jin Jinyu, making him realize he was facing a formidable opponent. In the next instant, they exchanged dozens of moves, locked in a fierce battle with no clear winner. With such skills, Jin Jinyu was certain that this opponent must be a chimera. He didn't want to engage further. He activated the parasitic mode. The control tendrils firmly bound the opponent. Taking advantage of this moment, he flashed towards the control core to grab it. Suddenly, he sensed a black shadow wrapped in spiritual energy approaching with terrifying pressure. This made him instantly abandon the idea of a head-on confrontation. As he landed, he used his feet to push off forcefully, propelling himself several meters away. After stabilizing himself, he looked up. Two tall figures stood with their swords blocking the maze core, but it wasn't over yet. Another figure holding a staff emerged from the dust, raising their hand to summon a green light that shot towards him without warning. This gave him the sudden illusion of facing a life or death crisis. With a violent explosion, Angela saw Jin Jenny's figure being blasted out of the explosion. The next second, a dust-covered Jin Jenny landed beside her. "Master, are you hurt?" Fortunately, Jin Jenny had reacted quickly and only suffered some superficial wounds. Seeing this, Kim Jin-woo immediately felt anxious. He quickly shared the information with Domi, seeking a countermeasure. Domi's proposed solution was to immediately summon a sufficient number of combat-type troops, because currently they only had one guard watching the warehouse. Getting up and looking towards the undead maze in the distance, he said inside, "I encountered 3 powerful humanoid chimeras." Angela then looked in the same direction. She saw the 3 figures Jin Jinyu mentioned, but this look revealed something unusual. Master, look, their earrings, they're identical to Lisa's. Jin Jinyu immediately thought this is bad. He quickly turned to look at Lisa's position. At the same time, Lisa, standing at a high point, seemed to have also seen those 3 figures. Her eyes widened, her face filled with shock and disbelief. The exiled princess of the Dark Elves, seeking revenge, had been living in anonymity for years, maneuvering among various underground maze factions. Secretly stirring up trouble, hoping to use this to destroy the undead lord who had slaughtered her people. Unexpectedly, just as she was planning to target the Garo maze, Jin Jinyu, the Lord of Garo, saw through her plan first. He took her under his wing, promising to help her get revenge by destroying the undead lord. At this moment, Jin Jinyu was personally leading thousands of Garo maze soldiers in a fierce battle against tens of thousands of undead troops from the undead maze. They were locked in a life and death struggle on the battlefield. Lisa, as a military leader, was also participating in the war. She had finally waited for this day of revenge. But at this moment, her eyes widened, her face filled with disbelief. Those figures appearing in the undead ranks were her 3 elder brothers. Kim Jin-woo switched to the control interface. Indeed, after upgrading to a level 3 maze, 4 new troop types appeared: the sharpshooting Garuara Archer, the formidable Garuara Berserker, the magically adept Garuara Mage, and the healing Garuara Priest. The 3 strongest warriors of the Dark Elves, who had been captured by the undead lord while trying to save her, their fate unknown until now. Unexpectedly, they had been turned into chimeras in this state. Lisa, suddenly coming to her senses, could no longer contain herself. She immediately drew her sword and charged into the undead ranks, disregarding all danger. Her only thought was to rescue her brothers immediately. This was exactly what Jin Jinyu had feared. He immediately turned and called to Angela. Angela instantly understood. She rushed out quickly. Just as the giant axe of an undead monster was about to fall, she saved Lisa. However, Lisa was now clearly blinded by hatred. Even as Angela carried her away, she struggled to throw her long sword towards the undead lord. Unfortunately, the sword merely grazed past, landing beside the undead lord's leg. The undead lord pulled it out with one hand. A harsh, unpleasant sound came from the blade. I intentionally let you escape back then, yet now you come back seeking death. This statement puzzled Jinjenu, as he knew the undead lord had been causing havoc everywhere to capture powerful species for chimera research. In fact, the undead lord wasn't lying. He had indeed set a trap after capturing Lisa, aiming to capture the three strongest warriors of the Dark Elves. With these three, he naturally wouldn't care about Lisa's existence. These troop types covered various aspects and were all very powerful. Of course, they also required a large consumption of gems, but currently there were only 21 gems in the account. The next second, the undead soldier possessed by the undead lord was torn apart by a mist of blood. It was Angela's doing, unable to contain her anger. She empathized with Lisa's grief and rage. However, Angela's actions seemed to have provoked the undead lord's fury. This time, he appeared in his true form behind several elf chimeras. He ordered the sluggish elf chimeras to deal with Angela and permitted them to use soul magic for attacks. As soon as he finished speaking, without warning, Angela was suddenly blasted away by a beam of magic. The impact caused Lisa to slip from her arms. She fell heavily to the ground from midair. As Lisa was struggling to get up, enduring the intense pain, a tall figure landed in front of her. It was her eldest brother, who possessed the strength of a level 3 hero. Lisa couldn't help but tear up again, but before she could call out her brother's name, she received a heavy blow to her abdomen. Causing excruciating pain, her body was immediately kicked away by this powerful figure, crashing into a rock. Meanwhile, just as Jinjinu was about to get up to rescue Lisa, he suddenly sensed a sharp gust of wind coming from behind. How does summon troops reasonably became a problem? Just as Kim Jinwoo was troubled by this, Domi reminded him from the side that Horned Rat's actual combat power was not high. He decisively turned and blocked with his sword. To his shock, although he had blocked the incoming blade, his arm still erupted with a bloody gash. The force enraged him and he swung his sword to launch a fierce counterattack. Then, seizing an opening, he leaped up, flashing several meters away. At this moment, he was utterly astonished. The opponent could actually imbue their blade with a sharp aura. He immediately became more cautious, activating his armor to cover his body and using his scouting eye to scan the opponent. He couldn't help but draw a sharp breath. The system showed that the opponent was a legendary level hero. As he was stunned, the white-haired elf suddenly swung their sword with both hands. The terrifyingly powerful blade aura was upon him in an instant. With no time to think, his body instinctively ducked, but the undead behind him weren't so lucky. They were mercilessly cut down like grass by the terrifying blade aura. Unexpectedly, just as he straightened up, the white-haired elf's blade aura came at him again. In a split second, he only managed to activate his parasitic mode. His form was then engulfed by the opponent's world-shaking blade aura. Angela, watching this scene from midair, couldn't help but cry out in alarm, but this also made her realize something. Recalling the attack she had just suffered in the scene before her eyes, she couldn't help but feel confused. Because she knew that undead creatures couldn't possibly be compatible with soul magic. After all, undead magic and elven soul magic were incompatible opposing forces. As she was lost in confusion, little did she know that an attack against her was already being quietly prepared. One Garura guard could fight 4 horned rats alone. A berserker or a priest was equivalent to 2 Garura guards. An archer's combat power corresponded to 3 Garura guards, while a mage corresponded to 5 Garura guards. Moreover, the elven mage preparing to attack her possessed the terrifying strength of a legendary level 2 hero. The next instant, an overwhelming wave of soul energy surged towards Angela. It reached her eyes in a flash, causing Angela to be extremely alarmed. She immediately transformed into a streak of blood, weaving through the dense waves of energy to evade. However, she was inadvertently drawn to a light glowing at the core. She immediately understood it was the undead lord, controlling the mage to attack her. She summoned a blood-colored energy ball in response, angrily hurling it towards the undead lord. To her surprise, this energy ball was blocked by a shield the undead lord casually conjured, but this interruption broke the undead lord's control and no more energy waves came at Angela. Taking advantage of this pause, she surveyed the battlefield and was shocked, judging from the abilities displayed by these 3 elf chimeras. They possess combat, magic, and healing regeneration abilities respectively. It was an absolutely perfect, flawless combination. She had to quickly relay these findings to Jinjenu. Suddenly, she formed a hand seal. A communication magic orb instantly formed. The next second, it flew to Jinjenu's side. Master, those elves probably aren't completely dead. Hearing this, Jinjenia's heart trembled. This moment of distraction cost him another wound. Finally, she emphasized that except for warriors, other troop types were weak in close combat, so the troop ratio must be carefully considered. Through Domi's easy-to-understand comparison, Kim Jin-woo instantly had an idea. Master, in other words, their bodies have died, but their souls still remain. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to use soul magic. The reason they obey the undead lord is probably because they've been hypnotized and brainwashed. After hearing Angela's report, Jin Jinyu had a rough plan in mind. Seizing an opportunity, he kicked the white-haired elf away and began searching for Lisa on the battlefield because his plan required Lisa's cooperation to work. Meanwhile, the sluggish elf had already approached Lisa. In this critical moment, he hurriedly called for Yunxi to rescue Lisa. Upon receiving the instruction, Yunchai immediately redirected her energy. In an instant, she transformed from an arrow held by the enemy to rushing towards Lisa's position. Wait, Jin Genius seemed to grasp something crucial. He muttered Yunchai brainwashing maze. These keywords connected, suddenly making him realize something. He immediately channeled energy throughout his body, clearing a wide area. Then, as if tearing space itself, a large door appeared behind him. The system prompt also sounded at this moment. You have entered the territory of the carnival maze. That's right, Jinjen, you had actually summoned the entrance to the carnival maze on the battlefield. With a roar that echoed around, he shouted, Yunxi, quickly cast Sweet Dream. The three strongest knights of the Elf Kingdom, who once swore to protect their princess with their lives, were now about to strike a fatal blow to their princess. This was because they had been hypnotized and brainwashed by the evil undead lord. Turned into chimeras without thoughts, only knowing how to kill, seeing that Lisa, severely wounded, was about to lose her life. Time was tight, so he immediately began summoning. After a burst of sparks and lightning, two imposing figures appeared. Jin Zhenyu immediately ordered Yunxi to rescue her. Watching Yunxi's rapidly flying figure, he instantly grasped an idea to resolve the current predicament, that is, to awaken the three brainwashed elf knights, restore their clarity, and regain their independent consciousness. And Yunxi, who inherited the carnival maze, had just the right ability to make people relive their beautiful memories, hoping to awaken the elves' clouded minds. Although he wasn't entirely confident to save Lisa and turn the tide of battle, he immediately decided to take the risk and open the carnival maze on the battlefield. This was the prerequisite for using this skill, but the risk was that if they lost this battle, the undead lord would surely take advantage and occupy the carnival maze through the portal. But there was no time to consider much else. He promptly ordered Yunxi to cast Sweet Dream. This made Yunxi, who was originally planning to snatch Lisa away, immediately cast Sweet Dream instead. Princess, it's dangerous outside the castle. You can't keep sneaking out without telling anyone. I'm not afraid. I have you, Knight Little. You'll always protect me like this, right? All right, Princess. That's exactly why I came looking for you. I will become the shield that always stands before you. Forever and ever, I'll be your shield. At this moment, Linnell's consciousness was pulled back to reality. In total, 1 Garara guard and 2 Garara berserkers were summoned. The Garara berserkers' forms were truly intimidating. The heterochromatic Garara guard that was summoned could only shrink to the side, trembling. He immediately recognized the person before him. It was Lisa, the princess he had promised to protect for life. Looking at the shield he had raised above his head, he seemed to realize something. He immediately dropped the shield and fell to his knees before Lisa, panic-stricken. Princess, you're hurt, you're bleeding. What have I done to you? What have I done? Deep remorse and sorrow made him too afraid to touch Lisa. He only remembered that when the princess was captured by the undead lord, she was used to force the three of them to submit. He finally recalled some past memories, realizing that everything was because of the undead lord's cruelty. He immediately turned around, facing the direction of the undead lord, and let out an angry roar. Unexpectedly, he was suddenly hit by a tremendous force from behind. His entire body was uncontrollably smashed into the rocks. The billowing dust cloud perfectly blocked the undead lord's view, preventing him from seeing anything clearly. But he was puzzled, thinking he had heard a voice calling him just now. Unable to find the source, he decided to ignore it and prepare to raise his hand to continue controlling the elf mage to deal with Angela. His actions made Angela breathe a sigh of relief, as she had been very worried about Yunchai's situation being discovered. However, Yunchai's mind had not yet recovered. so she obviously wouldn't help cover things up. He must first find a way to help cover things up over there. This immediately made her face turn pale with fear. Seeing this, Kim Jin-woo was also delighted. Instinctively, he moved to shield himself. He even had the impulse to immediately lead the Gera berserkers to find the Wolf Marquis and avenge his previous humiliation. But while pondering, magical attacks aimed at him were gathering again. He could only hurriedly dodge. Meanwhile, Yunchai was stepping on Linnell. But Linnell, now awake, thought Yunchai was a servant of the undead lord and was about to retaliate. Fortunately, Angela's voice transmission orb appeared just in time. After identifying herself as a friend, she also informed him of his current true situation. You are already an undead. If the undead lord notices anything unusual, he will cut off your energy source to cause trouble. You will truly cease to exist, or he might brainwash you again and send you to attack Lisa. Hearing this, Lin will suppress his rage. What he truly feared was being brainwashed and hurting Lisa again. Seeing this point was settled. The voice transmission orb immediately relayed this good news to Jean Genu, suggesting to cast spells on the other two elves before the undead lord noticed to awaken their consciousness. The idea was good, but reality was harsh.